The arrest. The hum of the engine was a soothing backdrop as Olivia Lawson guided her silver sedan down a sleepy two-lane road cutting through rural Maryland. The sun hummed low in the sky, golden rays brushing the tops of budding trees lining the road. It was one of those quiet, unassuming mornings, the kind Olivia treasured. The kind that, if all went well, would slip into the background of her memory, uneventful and peaceful. Her radio murmured softly, a local station reporting on a community scholarship drive. Olivia smiled to herself. This was her old county, Prince George's, and despite the years and promotions, she never truly left it behind. Even now, holding one of the most classified titles in the intelligence world, she still carved out time to volunteer at the very community center where her love of technology had blossomed as a teenager. On the seat beside her lay a sturdy black leather laptop bag. Inside, a stripped-down laptop, preloaded with basic cybersecurity tutorials, a couple of outdated motherboards, and a handful of brightly colored USB drives she intended to give away to students later that day. It was a simple plan. A couple of hours showing high schoolers how to secure their devices, and maybe, just maybe, inspire the next Olivia Lawson. She didn't see the police cruiser until it was nearly on her bumper. The black and white slid in behind her, close enough that Olivia could make out the faint scuff marks on the front grille. Her heart skipped a beat, not because she was speeding, but because in her world, random encounters were never truly random. She flicked her eyes to the rearview mirror, cataloging details with the trained efficiency of someone whose mind was always processing threats. 2 officers, male, neither particularly old, one with a close-cropped haircut, the other masked behind mirrored sunglasses. When the lights flashed, a nauseating pulse of red and blue, Olivia's fingers tightened on the wheel. Years of training drilled into her spine. Keep calm. Be polite. Both hands visible. No sudden moves. She eased the car onto the gravel shoulder and killed the engine. Through the side mirror, she watched the 2 men approach, boots crunching on loose stones. Their pace wasn't casual. It was purposeful, hungry. Something about the set of their shoulders made Olivia's stomach knot. The officer closest to her window knocked sharply. License and registration. Olivia, in her crisp navy slacks and soft lilac blouse, radiated the kind of unshakable poise that had silenced war rooms. But that armor wasn't meant for this. Not for roadside interrogations where the rules were blurry and the outcomes depended less on the law and more on the whims of men with badges and unchecked power. "Good morning, officer," Olivia said, her voice even. She handed over her ID and registration with practiced smoothness. Was I speeding? The cop, name tag reading TLBOT, didn't answer. His partner, Morales, hung back, hands clasped in front of him, but Olivia could feel his eyes. A tangible weight studying her face, her skin. Talbot glanced at her ID. "Were you headed in such a hurry, Miss Lawson?" "No hurry. I'm volunteering at a community center in town," Olivia replied. The two exchanged a glance, the kind of silent conversation that spoke volumes. Morales leaned toward the open passenger side window, taking in her laptop bag, her crisp professionalism, her expensive watch. "Step out of the vehicle, Mom." Olivia's stomach flipped, but she obeyed. Standing on the gravel, feeling the early spring sun warm her skin, she kept her breathing even. She was unarmed, unthreatening, yet she knew better than to assume she was safe. "Mind if we take a look inside the trunk?" Talbot asked, though the question was a formality. Olivia's mind spun through options. Refusing might escalate the situation. Allowing them to search felt like surrendering to a game already rigged. "Go ahead," she said, her voice flat. Morales moved to the trunk while Talbot stayed too close, his eyes flicking over her face like he was memorizing her. Olivia held still, the cool breeze barely touching the sweat forming at her temples. Something about this wasn't right. The trunk opened with a metallic groan. Morales rifled through her bag of gear, clattering cables and spare hardware onto the gravel. Then came the plastic bag. It was so out of place, a knotted baggie of white powder. It almost seemed cartoonish. Morels held it up with exaggerated care, turning to Talbot with theatrical surprise. Well, Talbot drawled. What do we have here? Olivia's mind blanked for a half-second. Then, adrenaline flooded her veins. That's not mine, she said, her voice louder than intended. That was planted. Talbot's grin was all teeth. Is that so? You're welcome to explain it downtown. He spun her around before she could respond, cold cuffs biting into her wrists. Olivia's pulse roared in her ears. There was no warning, no pretense of investigation. Just a straight line from discovery to arrest, as though they'd rehearsed it. As they shoved her into the back of the cruiser, gravel crunching beneath her heels, Olivia felt the sheer absurdity of the moment. A black woman, handcuffed, framed on the side of a quiet Maryland road. It was a scene ripped from too many headlines, too many tragedies. But Olivia was not most people. She was the director of the National Security Agency. The only reason she didn't blow her cover there, and then, was because she knew, with absolute certainty, that the system these men represented would twist even her truth into another weapon. If they knew who she was, they wouldn't release her, they'd bury her. From the back seat, Olivia watched the roadside slip past, her reflection fractured in the partition glass. Her breath slowed, the raw edge of panic blunted by the emergence of something colder, something calculated. Her mind shifted into gear. Threat analysis, resource inventory, points of leverage. This was not where her story ended. This was where her story began. The station's walls. The station smelled like old coffee, sweat, and the stale stink of recycled air pushed through ancient vents. Olivia sat stiff-backed on the metal bench, her hands still cuffed in front of her. The booking room's flickering fluorescent lights cast a sickly green tint over the scuffed floor and peeling paint, giving the whole place the feel of a rotting corpse, decay masked by bureaucratic motions. Talbot leaned lazily against the counter, scribbling out his version of events, every so often glancing over his shoulder at Olivia. His smirk hadn't slipped, the satisfied curve of a man who thought he'd already won. Morales was nowhere to be seen, but Olivia could feel his greasy presence lingering in the station like an oil slick on water. She kept her expression neutral, but beneath the surface, her mind was already slicing through the variables, tracking the timeline, identifying weak points. The men in this building, they thought they had her. They thought she was just another black woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. What they didn't know was that Olivia had written the playbook for dismantling adversarial networks. She'd spent over a decade at the NSA mapping out everything from terrorist cells to cybercrime syndicates, and now she was mapping them. The sound of a buzzing fluorescent light was almost drowned out by the click-click-click of nails tapping against a plastic keyboard. The desk sergeant, a bloated man with thinning hair and the air of someone who gave up on ideals 20 years ago, squinted at his screen. "Name?" he asked, not even looking up. "Olivia Lawson," she replied evenly. The sergeant frowned slightly, typing slower. For a fraction of a second, Olivia wondered if her name was pinging something. An encrypted flag buried deep in a system somewhere, alerting the right people that someone important was sitting in a holding cell. But if it did, nothing showed on his face. Charges are possession with intent to distribute and resisting arrest. His voice was flat, mechanical, already bored with her life. Olivia didn't flinch. "I'll need my phone call." The surgeon's mouth twisted into something halfway between a grimace and a smirk. "That'll come after processing. Standard procedure." Standard procedure. The kind of phrase that covered every sin in the American justice system. Olivia had seen it invoked over waterboarding memos and data collection expansions. It was a phrase that meant we can do what we want, and you'll take it. The cuffs came off only long enough for her to press her fingertips into black ink and then onto a fingerprint card. They photographed her in front of a stained cinder block wall, the flash reflecting off her dark skin. She made herself meet the camera head-on, chin slightly lifted. If they were going to document her humiliation, she would make sure they captured her dignity too. It was only after they locked her in a holding cell, a cramped space with 2 cracked plastic benches and a toilet that had seen better centuries, that she finally allowed herself to close her eyes and breathe. She had about 30 seconds before the storm hit. Her first move wasn't to panic. It wasn't to rage. It was to observe. The other women in the cell were worn thin by the system, younger than Olivia, but aged by constant battle. One sat with her knees drawn up, her arms wrapped around them, staring into nothing. Another paced in tight circles, muttering under her breath about a missed court date and her kid's asthma medication. The third, a woman in her early 20s with braids streaked gold and black, eyed Olivia with cautious curiosity. "You knew?" the woman asked. Olivia nodded. "Wrong place, wrong time." The woman snorted. "Ain't that all of us?" They didn't talk after that, but Olivia noticed the subtle shift. She wasn't marked as an outsider. Not yet. If she stayed quiet, stayed unthreatening, she could blend into the background, which is exactly what she needed. When they finally gave her her phone call, the receiver felt slick with sweat and disinfectant. Olivia dialed a number she had memorized years ago, her fingers moving automatically even though her hands shook just slightly. The call rang twice before Robert answered. "Hello." His voice was calm, even, the kind of voice that had guided teams through cyber warfare and national crisis. But Olivia could hear the faint tension under it, the steel wire tightening. "It's me," Olivia said, keeping her tone measured. "I need help." Robert didn't ask where she was. He knew. Somehow, he always knew. "Hold tight," he said. "I'm on it." She hung up, placing the receiver back with deliberate care, like she was laying down a weapon. Then she let them march her back to the cell. The real fight had just begun. Meanwhile, NSA headquarters. Robert Hastings' office was a fortress of brushed steel, matte screens, and the constant soft hum of high-powered encryption systems. Maps flickered on a 60-inch screen behind his desk, shifting overlays from international threats to domestic surveillance grids. He didn't sit when Olivia's call ended. He stood, hand braced on his desk, mind already running calculations. This was bad. He'd suspected something was brewing. A local law enforcement officer sniffing too close to Olivia's cover. They'd had to alter travel patterns once or twice, pull her from scheduled appearances to avoid tipping anyone off. But this wasn't a coincidence. This was a deliberate move. And if someone in Prince George's County thought they could target Olivia Lawson and survive it, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Robert tapped a key, pulling up Olivia's encrypted file. Officially, she was a mid-level cybersecurity consultant. Unofficially, she was the director of the National Security Agency, the highest-ranking black woman in the intelligence community, and one of the most powerful covered figures in the country. And right now she was sitting in a dirty county cell because some 2-bit corrupt officers had no idea they'd just kicked a hornet's nest. "Deploy Ghost Protocol," Robert said aloud, and the office speakers acknowledged his voice print. Screens shifted, calls were routed, burner lines activated. A handful of agents across the East Coast received silent alerts, their personal devices buzzing with a single message: asset compromised. Immediate retrieval. This wasn't just about clearing Olivia's name. This was about finding out who had set this in motion, and why. Because Robert didn't believe in coincidences, not when Olivia Lawson was the target. Back at the station, hours dragged by. Olivia rationed her energy, sitting in the corner of the cell, watching patterns. Which officers stayed near the desk? Which ones vanished into back rooms? Which ones didn't meet her eyes? It was Talbot and Morella's show, but they weren't alone. She caught snippets of conversation. An officer referencing a package waiting at the impound lot, another mentioning the boss being pleased. It was deliberately vague, but Olivia had cracked global espionage rings with less. She wasn't sure if the boss was some petty local kingpin or something larger, but one thing was clear: her arrest was a job, not an accident. When Sergeant Rawlings finally opened her cell, his expression was neutral, but Olivia saw the tension in his hands, the slight tremor as he unlocked the door. "Your lawyer's here." Olivia's heart gave a strange twist, part relief, part dread. She followed him out, her footsteps measured. Every step took her closer to confrontation, to whoever had set this up, and to the truth she was about to drag into the light. She entered the room expecting Robert to have sent some faceless corporate lawyer, someone clean-cut and detached. Instead, Robert was there himself, a leather briefcase in hand, and a storm brewing behind his eyes. "Olivia," he said softly, with that rare warmth he only ever used for her. Relief was a dangerous emotion, but she let herself feel it, just for a moment. Then they sat across from each other, and Olivia laid her hands flat on the table. "Find out who did this," she said. Robert's smile was all teeth. "Oh, I intend to." Beneath the surface, the conference room was a relic of the 1980s, fluorescent lights humming above, mismatched chairs scraping the tile floor, a crooked corkboard on the wall with pinned notices no one had updated since the last county budget cut. Olivia sat across from Robert, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the cool metal of the handcuffs they had just removed leaving an impression against her skin. Robert's presence was steady, the kind of anchor Olivia had relied on during some of the darkest moments of her career. Cyber attacks from hostile states, rogue intelligence assets going dark, even threats against her life that never made it to the news. But this was different. This was personal. Robert placed a slim black folder on the table, his fingers resting atop it like it was a detonator. His face was calm, but Olivia knew him too well. The set of his jaw, the slight tension around his eyes. Robert Hastings was angry. And when Robert was angry, entire governments felt the tremor. "First," Robert said, his voice low, "you okay?" It was the first personal question anyone had asked her since the moment Talbot slammed the cuffs on her wrists. For a moment, her throat tightened. She hadn't had time to feel anything. Not fear, not anger, not even the full weight of humiliation. Everything had been calculation and containment. "I'm fine," she said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. "What do we know?" Robert slid the folder toward her. Olivia opened it, her gaze quickly scanning the contents: profiles, financial records, redacted communications. Morells and Talbot were there, but so were two names she didn't recognize: Eric Dunlow and Leona Graves. "Who are they?" Olivia asked. "Dunlow is the captain of the precinct," Robert said, leaning back. "Graves is the county's civilian procurement officer." Olivia's brow furrowed. "Procurement? What does this have to do with me?" "That's the part we're still piecing together." Robert tapped the pages. "This isn't just about you being a convenient black woman alone on a county road. They knew exactly who you were. At least, they knew enough. That caught her off guard. Knew I worked at the NSA. More than that." Robert's lips thinned. "They flagged your name in a private data stream about 3 months ago. Not official channels. Some underground network we've been trying to map. Dark money moving through county government contracts. Someone ran your plates through their system the minute you entered Prince George's." Olivia's stomach flipped. This wasn't garden variety profiling. This was surveillance. "And they planted evidence so quickly," Robert continued, "because they wanted you neutralized. Either locked up or scared off. You were a target long before that cruiser pulled behind you." Olivia closed the folder with deliberate calm, fingers pressing into the thin cardboard. "They're scared of me," she said softly. "Not you personally," Robert said. "They're scared of what you might see if you got too close." Her mind raced through the possibilities. She had planned to stop at the community center, to teach a class on cybersecurity, nothing more. But Olivia didn't believe in coincidences. Something, or someone, at that center was too close to a secret they needed buried. "Have we swept the center systems?" Olivia asked. Robert nodded. "Preliminary scan already done. Their servers are outdated, unsecured. but nothing obvious stood out. However, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small thumb drive. One of the kids found this. He handed it to her. Olivia turned it over in her hand, its cheap plastic casing scuffed. Found. Take to the underside of a desk in the computer lab, Robert said. Damon, one of the students, brought it in. The name tugged at her memory. Damon was the kid who always sat up front, peppering her with questions about firewalls and encryption. Smart, curious, and one of the reasons she kept coming back. Olivia plugged the drive into Robert's laptop. A single folder popped up. WATCH. Inside were files, photographs of county officials, surveillance footage from City Hall, even scans of financial documents. Olivia's breath caught when she saw the most damning file of all. A ledger. Not digital. A scanned handwritten ledger detailing payments to county officials from a shell company in Delaware. A shell company tied to known operatives in Eastern Europe. Olivia's mind spun. This wasn't just local corruption. This was infiltration. A foreign intelligence operation burrowing into Prince George's County through the most mundane, overlooked channels. Police contracts, procurement deals, public works. They're laundering money through the county, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But why target me? Because you're the one person who would recognize the pattern. Robert's expression darkened. You've busted enough of these networks overseas. They knew if you got too close, you'd see the signs. Olivia felt the full weight of realization settle onto her shoulders. This wasn't about her race or a random traffic stop. This was a preemptive strike. Someone, foreign or domestic, had decided Olivia Lawson was a threat before she even knew they existed. Robert leaned forward, elbows on the table. This is bigger than dirty cops planting drugs. Someone's building an influence network in your backyard. They're buying loyalty from the ground up. Police, procurement, even local judges. Olivia's pulse pounded in her ears. Have you traced the shell company? Partially, Robert said. It's bounced through enough cutouts to keep us chasing our tails. But we have a working theory. Someone high up in the county government is coordinating. Talbot and Morales are just foot soldiers. Olivia's fists clenched. So they're willing to frame a sitting intelligence officer to protect their pipeline. Robert's gaze was sharp. They don't know exactly who you are. Not yet. They just know you're dangerous. That was small comfort. The storm she'd felt gathering around her was no longer abstract. It was here, tangible, a conspiracy wrapped in 1,000 layers of mundane paperwork, small bribes, and compromised officials. What's our next move? She asked. Robert stood, smoothing his tie. First, we get you out of here. Your arraignment's in an hour. I'm officially your legal counsel for now. That'll buy us time. Olivia's brow arched. Since when did you practice law? I still have the license, Robert said with a slight smile. But I won't need to argue much. We're going to bury them in documentation. Danielle Glass is already in motion. The name was familiar. A relentless defense attorney who had carved her reputation exposing police corruption cases. Olivia felt the first flicker of hope. Second, Robert continued, we activate Watchdog. Olivia's eyes narrowed. What's Watchdog? It's the kids' name for what they were doing, Robert said. A small group of high schoolers, self-taught hackers, mostly, who started digging into county corruption when one of their brothers got wrongfully arrested. Olivia's lips parted in surprise. Kids. Smart kids, Robert corrected. Kids who stumbled onto a bigger conspiracy than they could handle. Olivia exhaled, processing the weight of it all. If these kids had uncovered the bones of the operation, it meant the rot was deeper than she feared. It also meant they were in danger. We need to protect them, she said firmly, and we need to burn this whole thing down. Robert's smile was all teeth. That's why you're the boss. There was a knock at the door. A uniformed officer stood there, expression guarded. Time for court. Olivia stood, straightening her shoulders. Whatever they threw at her, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because Olivia Lawson didn't just survive conspiracies, she dismantled them from the inside out. Courtroom currents. The hallway leading to courtroom 4A smelled of disinfectant and sour coffee, a thin veneer covering decades of institutional rot. Olivia's footsteps echoed softly, each one deliberate, her heels clicking against cracked tile. Her hands were free now, thanks to Robert's intervention, but the invisible shackles of the charges filed against her felt no less heavy. Her wrists still ached from the handcuffs, a dull reminder that power, no matter how carefully built, could be snatched away by two crooked men with badges and ambition. She had faced enemies before, hostile state actors, rogue cyber cells, and black market information brokers, but the petty tyranny of dirty local cops was a new kind of venom. There was no grand ideology behind Talbot and Morales, no complex geopolitical play, just greed, arrogance, and the belief that no one would care what happened to another black woman on the side of a lonely Maryland road. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Robert walked beside her, every inch the polished professional. Navy suit tailored, briefcase in hand, his expression a carefully controlled mask. But Olivia knew him too well. The slight tension at his jaw, the flicker of fury in his eyes whenever Talbot's name came up. Robert was seething beneath the surface. And unlike Talbot, Robert's fury had the weight of an intelligence machine behind it. "You ready?" Robert murmured as they neared the courtroom doors. Olivia gave a faint smile. "I was born ready." Inside, the gallery was already half full. Reporters, curious local activists, and a handful of community leaders who'd taken an interest in her case after word spread that the charges might not be as cut and dry as the police claimed. The courtroom was small, with wooden benches worn smooth by generations of tense bodies waiting for judgment. Talbot was there, seated beside Morales. Both wore clean, pressed uniforms, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. They looked confident, smug even, like men who had played this game so many times they no longer felt the slightest hesitation planting evidence, falsifying reports, and sending innocent people into the system. Their mistake, Olivia thought, was assuming they were still the smartest people in the room. She took her seat at the defense table. Danielle Glass, the defense attorney Robert had brought in, was already reviewing her notes, her manicured fingers flipping through page after page of case files and discovery documents. Danielle was a striking figure, tall, angular, with a sharpness in her eyes that suggested she had been tempered by years of battling systems designed to crush her clients. Danielle glanced at Olivia, ready to make history. "Always," Olivia said softly. The judge entered, an older black woman with silver hair tucked into a bun and a presence that radiated authority. Judge Valerie Thornton had a reputation for cutting through theatrics and seeing straight to the core of a case. Olivia found herself hoping that reputation was deserved. The bailiff called the case, State of Maryland versus Olivia Lawson. The prosecutor stood, Harold Minton, the kind of career prosecutor who measured success by his conviction rate, not the pursuit of justice. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his voice flat and almost bored as he recited the charges. Possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, resisting arrest. "Ms. Lawson is a flight risk and a danger to the community," Minton declared, his words rehearsed. "We recommend remand without bail." Danielle rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my client is a respected professional with no criminal history. She has deep ties to the community and poses no threat to public safety." The judge's eyes flicked to Olivia, studying her with a cool, assessing gaze. Olivia met that gaze head-on. Whatever you see, Olivia thought, see all of me. Not just a defendant, a professional, a patriot, and a woman who had spent her life defending this country from enemies foreign and domestic. "Bail is set at $5,000, Judge Thornton said. "Next hearing in 1 week." Minton's lips pursed, but he didn't object. It was a small victory, but Olivia knew better than to take comfort in it. Talbot and Morales weren't worried about bail hearings. They had other plans. The moment court adjourned, Talbot approached, moving with the predatory ease of someone who had long ago stopped seeing his targets as people. "Nice suit," he said, voice low enough for only Olivia to hear. "Hope you're comfortable in it, because you won't be wearing it for long." Olivia turned slowly, her gaze meeting his. "You should be more careful with your predictions, Officer Talbot." His smirk twitched. "I know how this game ends." "So do I," Olivia said softly. "The difference is, I play the long game." Before Talbot could respond, Robert stepped in, his presence like a cold gust of wind cutting through the exchange. "Officer Talbot," Robert said pleasantly, "enjoy this moment. It's probably the last one you'll have." Talbot's smirk faltered. Morels tugged at his sleeve, and the two disappeared into the hall. "Thanks," Olivia murmured. "Don't thank me yet," Robert said. "We have work to do." The underground map. That night, Olivia sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, documents spread around her like puzzle pieces waiting for connection. Robert had returned to the NSA to coordinate the broader investigation, but Olivia couldn't just sit and wait. She wasn't built for waiting. The files from the Watchdog flash drive were a mess, half-scanned documents, notes scribbled in the margins, blurry photos taken with shaky hands. But there was something there. A pattern. Payments funneled through 3 shell companies, all tied to county contracts. Janitorial services, fleet maintenance, even vending machines in government buildings. The amounts were small enough to avoid attention, but over time, they added up to millions. The money didn't stop at county officials. It branched out to local businesses, private contractors, and most concerning, certain law enforcement officers. Talbot and Morales had each received regular deposits, just under the reporting threshold, laundered through intermediary accounts. But why? Olivia's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up databases the public would never see. She traced the shell companies back to their origin. A legal firm in Delaware, with ties to an international consortium, under investigation for influence campaigns in Eastern Europe and South America. Influence campaigns, infiltration, buying local power structures to control law enforcement, procurement, even community programs. They weren't just corrupt. They were building a pipeline, using Prince George's County as a testbed for larger operations. Her mind sharpened. The community center was the key. The one place in the county they didn't fully control. The place where local kids were learning to see the gaps, ask the questions, and follow the money. That's why they needed her out of the way. Her presence at the community center, her quiet mentoring, her encouragement of those kids to ask questions, it made her a threat. And in their world, threats had to be eliminated. Her phone buzzed. A text from Robert. "Need you at HQ. Bring everything." She grabbed the files, her laptop, and the flash drive. Whatever was happening next, it wasn't going to be quiet. NSA command. The conference room at NSA headquarters was a stark contrast to the dingy courtroom. Sleek, cold, every surface humming with hidden tech. Robert stood at the head of the table, flanked by 2 senior analysts and a legal advisor. "We have a breach," Robert said without preamble. "Prince George's isn't just a local issue anymore." He tapped a screen, and a map of the eastern United States lit up. Small red dots clustered along the eastern seaboard. County offices, procurement departments, small police forces. "They're building networks across multiple counties," Robert said, "starting in Maryland, moving into Virginia, Delaware, and beyond. They're using law enforcement and local contracts to funnel money, compromise officials, and secure influence." Olivia's stomach tightened. This was bigger than her. "We have a week before your next hearing," Robert said. "We can either blow the whole thing wide open or dismantle it quietly." Olivia looked at the map, her fingers curling into fists. "We don't just dismantle it," she said softly. "We own it. Every piece, every connection." Robert's smile was all teeth. "Let's get to work. Unmasking the network. The sun barely crested the horizon as Olivia stood at her kitchen counter, her fingers curled around a steaming mug of black coffee. Her house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural after the past 72 hours. Her arrest, the humiliating booking, the courtroom whispers, all of it hung in the air like smoke. But Olivia wasn't someone who drowned in humiliation. She was someone who filed it away, catalogued every insult, every injustice, every moment she was underestimated. Then she weaponized it. Her laptop sat open on the counter, the screen a constellation of windows, financial records, property transfers, back-channel communications. Each one was a thread in the web she and Robert were unraveling. The more they pulled, the larger the conspiracy grew. What had started with Talbot and Morales now stretched far beyond Prince George's County. There were at least 7 counties across 3 states, all tied to the same shadowy network of shell companies, fake nonprofits, and whispered deals. And at the center, a faceless entity known only by the codename Crownspan. Olivia took a slow sip of her coffee, feeling the bitter warmth anchor her. The name was new, but the tactics were old. Infiltrate local governments, control law enforcement, choke off independent oversight. It was a blueprint Olivia had seen in Eastern Europe, where Russian-backed cells had used corrupt mayors and police chiefs to control entire towns. The difference was, this wasn't happening in Ukraine. It was happening here, in her backyard. Her phone buzzed. "Robert." "Open up," he said when she answered. "I'm outside." She unlocked the door, and Robert swept in, his own laptop bag slung over his shoulder, a folder thick with printouts in his hand. "Couldn't wait for HQ?" she asked dryly. "This is too dirty for HQ," he said, setting his bag down. "We need to move faster." He flipped open the folder, laying out satellite images, diagrams of county buildings, and a series of grainy surveillance photos showing Talbot and Morales entering and leaving a warehouse near the county impound lot. "Recognize this." Robert tapped the warehouse. Olivia frowned. "That's county storage. Old vehicles, seized property, junk evidence." "Not anymore." Robert's finger traced the perimeter. "This building was sold to a shell company 6 months ago. The same shell company funneling payments to Talbot and Morales." The pieces clicked in Olivia's mind. "It's a laundering hub," she said. "They're using the impound lot as cover." "Bigger than that," Robert said. "We found encrypted bursts coming from inside the building, irregular pings to offshore servers in Montenegro and Azerbaijan. Someone's using that building for more than dirty money." Olivia's breath slowed. "What's the timeline?" "We need to move in the next 48 hours, Robert said. "Before they realize we've linked it all together. Legally." Robert's smile was thin. "Technically, no." Olivia's fingers drummed the countertop. "We need evidence admissible in court. We need to know what they're hiding before they destroy it," Robert countered. "You think Talbot and Morales are just 2 bad cops? No, they're operators. They're foot soldiers in a much larger war." Olivia's jaw tightened. "Then we do both." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Both. We get the evidence, quietly. Then we burn their legal cover in open court," Olivia said. "We make the entire system complicit if they try to protect them." Robert gave her a look of admiration. "That's why you're the director." Her mouth quirked. "Dan right." The quiet entry. It was after midnight when Olivia stood at the edge of the county impound lot, her dark clothing blending with the shadows. Robert was beside her, earpiece snug, laptop perched on the hood of his unmarked SUV. The impound lot was lit by scattered floodlights, their beams broken by rusting chain-link fences and the hulks of abandoned cars. "This is insanity," Robert muttered. "You know that, right?" "Sanity's overrated," Olivia replied, her eyes on the warehouse. He tapped a key, cameras looped. "You've got a 6-minute window." Olivia moved fast, smooth, silent. Years of training weren't erased by a desk job, and her body remembered how to move through hostile spaces. The fence was old, chain links rusted at the base. A single twist, and she slid through, landing in the shadows. The side entrance to the warehouse had a basic keypad lock, county standard. Olivia had cracked more sophisticated systems blindfolded. She punched in a series of override codes, and the door slid open with a reluctant groan. Inside, the air was stale with oil, old cardboard, and the faint metallic scent of machinery. Rows of shelves lined the space, holding boxes marked with evidence tags. But Olivia wasn't here for the past. She was here for the now. At the back of the warehouse, hidden behind stacked crates, was a door that didn't belong. Newer, reinforced, its edges gleaming with recent welding. Olivia's pulse quickened. She placed her hand on the metal. Cool, solid, locked from within. Robert, back doors secured. She whispered into her earpiece. "Hold tight," he replied. "I'm sending a pulse." A faint vibration hummed through her feet as Robert's remote hack triggered the building's internal systems. The lock clicked open. Inside was nothing she expected, and everything she feared. Rows of servers, humming softly in the dark, blinking lights casting eerie reflections across the concrete floor. Screens mounted on the walls showed scrolling data. Financial transactions, live feeds from patrol cars, even real-time GPS tracking data for dozens of county vehicles. "Jesus," Olivia breathed. "It's a command center." "Get me a connection," Robert said. She slid a USB key into the nearest terminal, her custom tool bridging the gap between the county system and Robert's laptop. "Data transfer starting," he confirmed. But Olivia wasn't just watching the download bar. She was reading. Scrolling emails, intercepted text messages, logs from secret meetings at local motels. Talbot and Morales were middle management. The real power sat higher. County supervisors, a deputy mayor, even members of the zoning board. And above them all, a name she hadn't expected. Leona Graves, the civilian procurement officer. "She's the hub," Olivia whispered. "She oversees all the contracts. She's been feeding this network since day one." Robert's voice sharpened. "We need to go." But Olivia's eyes snagged on one more thing, a folder marked GATE-KEPR. She opened it. Inside were surveillance photos. Of her. Weeks of them. Olivia at the community center. Olivia leaving her home. Olivia meeting with local activists. They hadn't just targeted her at random. They'd been watching her for months. "Download everything," Olivia ordered. "This doesn't end with arrests. This ends with exposure." The second front. The next morning, Olivia walked into the courthouse, not as a defendant, but as a woman on a mission. The courtroom was packed. Local press had picked up on her case after rumors spread that the charges might collapse. Minton, the prosecutor, looked irritable, his confidence fraying as Danielle Glass strolled confidently to the defense table. "Ready to end this?" Danielle asked, her eyes gleaming. "More than ready," Olivia replied. The judge entered, her gavel sharp against the tension. "Before we proceed," Danielle said, rising, "we have new evidence." Minton groaned. "Your Honor." "You'll want to see this," Danielle said smoothly. She handed the bailiff a drive, who delivered it to the judge. "This evidence proves not only my client's innocence," Danielle said, "but exposes a systemic conspiracy involving multiple officers, county officials, and a covert foreign-funded influence network." The judge's eyes narrowed. "This better not be theatrics. Would you like to see video of Officer Morales planting evidence?" Danielle asked sweetly. The gallery gasped. Minton paled. The judge gestured sharply. "Play it." On the screen, clear as day, Morales' hand slipped into Olivia's trunk, depositing the bag of powder. The courtroom erupted. Olivia sat perfectly still, her calm radiating through the storm. Because this wasn't just a hearing. This was a reckoning. The final strike. The courtroom was no longer just a legal venue. It had become a battlefield. Olivia sat at the defense table, calm but unrelenting, her hands folded in her lap as the courtroom lights dimmed and the projector screen flickered to life. The video Danielle Glass had introduced began to play. Grainy at first, but soon crystal clear, the damning scene unfolding for all to see. There was Morales, standing beside Olivia's trunk during the traffic stop. His gloved hand slipped beneath her equipment bag, depositing a plastic baggie with a practiced flick of his wrist. The casual efficiency of it turned Olivia's stomach. He'd done this before, countless times. The gallery erupted. Gasps, murmurs, reporters' pens scratching furiously across notebooks. Even Judge Thornton's mouth tightened, her hands folded on her bench as if physically restraining herself from showing shock. Minton, the prosecutor, turned ghost pale. "Your Honor," Danielle said, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. This video was recovered from an internal surveillance system, not listed in the official evidence logs. The officers, the precinct, and the county all failed to disclose its existence. Judge Thornton's eyes locked onto Minton like a predator. "Explain." Minton stumbled to his feet. We were not made aware of." "You were responsible for ensuring complete evidence was disclosed to the defense," the judge snapped. "The court does not take kindly to deceit, intentional or not." Olivia kept her expression still, but inside, her pulse thundered. This was the first crack, and she knew how to widen it. "We're not done," Danielle said, pacing to the defense table and retrieving another flash drive. "This court needs to understand the full extent of what's at play." The judge gave a wary nod. "Proceed." The screen flickered again, shifting to a series of documents, spreadsheets, and photographs, the results of Olivia and Robert's late-night infiltration of the impound warehouse. "These are internal financial records," Danielle explained. "They document a systemic pattern of bribes, asset seizures, and illegal payments funneled through shell companies linked directly to the Prince George County Procurement Office." Minton tried to object. "This is beyond the scope of." "Sit down, counselor," the judge snapped. "I want to see this." On screen, the payments scrolled. Dozens of officers, contractors, and officials, all receiving quiet direct deposits just under the reporting threshold. Talbot, Morales, even Captain Dunlow and Procurement Officer Leona Graves. At the center of the diagram Olivia had drawn, glowing in digital clarity, was the codename Crownspan. The purpose of this network, Danielle continued, wasn't just personal enrichment. This was a carefully structured operation designed to embed corrupt influence deep into local law enforcement and government. The officers who arrested Ms. Lawson are part of this network. Their goal wasn't to enforce the law. It was to protect Crownspan's operations. The silence was so thick it felt like the room had been vacuum sealed. "Ms. Glass," Judge Thornton said slowly, "are you asserting that my county's police and government have been compromised by a foreign-funded operation?" Danielle turned slightly, nodding to Olivia. "I'm not asserting it, Your Honor. My client is prepared to testify to it." Every reporter in the room bolted to attention. Pens scratched furiously, and camera shutters snapped. The judge glanced at Olivia. "Are you sure you want to do this?" For the first time since her arrest, Olivia stood, her spine straight, her gaze steady. "Absolutely, Your Honor." Danielle guided her to the witness stand. The bailiff swore her in, and Olivia sat, folding her hands in her lap. Her heart was steady now. The fear that had gnawed at her in the cell, in the backseat of Talbot's cruiser, had been burned away, leaving only steel. "Please state your full name and occupation for the record," Danielle said. "My name is Olivia Lawson," Olivia said, her voice clear. "I am the director of the National Security Agency." The courtroom exploded. Gasps, shouted questions from the press. Even Minton's papers slipped from his hands in sheer shock. Judge Thornton's gavel slammed down hard. "Order. Order in the court." Danielle let the noise settle before continuing. "Director Lawson, why were you in Prince George's County on the day of your arrest?" "I was volunteering at the community center," Olivia said. I've mentored students there for years. That day, I was scheduled to teach a cybersecurity workshop. And prior to that day, had you ever been charged with a crime? Never. Had you ever been in possession of illegal drugs? No. Danielle paused, letting the simplicity of those answers land. When you were arrested, did you tell the officers your true identity? No, Olivia said. At the time, I believed it would escalate the situation and endanger my mission. Which mission? Olivia's gaze swept the room, identifying and dismantling foreign influence networks targeting American communities. More gasps. The press was frantic. Danielle approached the bench. Your Honor, we request the immediate dismissal of all charges against Director Lawson, as well as an order to open a formal federal investigation into the Prince George's County Police Department, the Procurement Office, and all associated entities. Judge Thornton didn't hesitate. So ordered. The gavel fell like a hammer sealing fate. But Olivia wasn't done. Your Honor, Olivia said, her voice carrying across the stunned room. With the court's permission, I have a statement. The judge leaned back, clearly intrigued. Proceed. Olivia stood. The cameras were rolling. The whole country would see this. My name is Olivia Lawson. I have spent my entire career protecting this nation from external threats. But today, I stand before you because the greatest threat I have ever faced came not from abroad, but from the very institution sworn to protect this community. She let the words sink in, scanning the room, making sure she met the eyes of the reporters, the community leaders, and even the officers in the gallery. Corruption isn't just an inconvenience, she continued. It's a cancer. It starts small, a bribe here, a favor there, until entire systems are compromised. And when systems fail, people suffer. Communities suffer. She stepped closer to the bench. The men who arrested me, Officers Talbot and Morales, didn't just violate my rights. They betrayed their oath. They planted evidence, falsified reports, and used their badges to silence anyone who stood in their way. She drew a breath, the full weight of her title behind her next words. But they are not the disease. They are the symptoms. The room was silent. The disease is a culture of impunity, a system where oversight is optional, where whistleblowers are punished, and where justice bends to power instead of the truth. Her hands rested lightly on the railing. I stand here not just to clear my name, but to demand something greater, accountability. Real, enforceable oversight of every officer, every contract, and every official who dares to serve their own interests instead of the public's. She saw the flicker in the judge's eyes, not just agreement, but a sense that history was tilting, right there in courtroom 4A. This community deserves better, Olivia said, her voice softening. Every community does, and if my arrest, my humiliation, and my fight can be the catalyst for change, then it was worth every moment. She stepped back, her heart hammering, but her face a mask of calm. Judge Thornton nodded slowly. Director Lawson, I believe this court, and this community, owes you more than an apology. The gavel struck, and Olivia's charges were officially dismissed. But Olivia knew her fight was far from over. Aftermath. The fallout was seismic. Talbot and Morales were arrested before they could leave the courthouse. Leona Graves resigned within hours, but her home was raided by federal agents before sunset. Investigations rippled outward, touching county commissioners, local contractors, even state officials. The Crown Span network, once a hidden ghost, was now the subject of national headlines. And Olivia, she stood in the center of it all. No longer just the hidden director of a shadowed agency, but a public figure, a living reminder that even the most powerful systems could be confronted. Weeks later, at the community center, Damon stood beside Olivia, his laptop open, showing her the latest program he was coding. "You're not scared of them coming after you?" Damon asked. Olivia smiled, her gaze steady. "They already did," she said. "And I'm still standing."